Oh, honey. You know, when you ask for lesbian Pulp Fiction, you can't expect much. But I expected more than this. Like, at least an hour more of movie. More of this. Hey, hi, hello, my name's Anarchy, and honey, this is not a critique, it's an investigation. Cue the royalty-free detective music. Ba-dum, 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 ba-dum. Is this the Pink Panther? Ba-dum, ba-dum. It's not gonna sound like that. I don't think that's royalty-free. Should I stop? Okay, The Crime. Honey Don't is the newest film in Trisha Cook and Ethan Coen's lesbian B-movie trilogy. It stars Margaret Qualley as Honey O'Donoghue, a private detective with a 70s, 60s aesthetic. I don't really know. I know it's around there. Honey finds herself wrapped up in a mystery involving a strange sex cult / Christian church run by Reverend Drew Devlin, Chris Evans, after Mia Novotny, Kara Peterson, a young woman who is in the church, ends up murdered in a staged car accident. As Honey is investigating this mystery, she begins a relationship with MG Falcone, Aubrey Plaza, a cop who helps her get information for her case. One morning, Honey's teenage niece, Corinne, Talia Ryder, comes to Honey's house after her boyfriend beats her. Honey patches her up, and then she goes and visits the Reverend, who is unhelpful in her investigation and who flirts with her. Later, Corinne sees a strange man at her work who keeps staring at her. She sees him again at the bus stop after work, and he tells her he loves her. Fun! She runs away, which is reasonable, but no one knows where she is. Honey looks for Corinne and keeps seeing advertisements for the church. She returns to the church only to witness a mysterious French woman leaving the parking lot of a completely locked down building. Honey looks to MG for help and wanders into MG's childhood home. There we learn MG killed Mia and she tries to kill Honey. Honey shoots her in the head, but faints from a stab wound and is somehow rushed to a hospital. We see Corinne was rescued as well, and we learn that she would have been MG's next victim if Honey hadn't killed MG. While this is going on, Devlin works to cover up the death of Mia, even though the culprit is not in his church. We learn that he is peddling drugs and one of the members of the church has OD'd. Still, he persists and has a young member of the church, Hector Jacquemire, to collect money for a client who hasn't paid for drugs yet. The incident ends with Hector accidentally killing the client. I think it was in a sexually disgusted rage because the client is like, "I'll blow you," and then gets down on his knees. But I can't watch the scene without paying for the movie again, and I'm not doing that. Since there was a witness, Devlin sends his right-hand Shuggy, Josh Pafchek, to kill Hector. Shuggy and Hector's abuela end up dead. Hector attacks Devlin, but Devlin survives unscathed. Because of this mess, a mysterious French woman who works with Devlin kills him to contain the mess he created and the French's involvement with it. Does any of that make sense? No? Good. At the end of the movie, Honey drives off into the sunset, into the city, ready for her next adventure, and she comes across the mysterious French woman besides her on the motorcycle with the same 60s, 70s inspired style, and she flirts with her, and we learn that the French woman is named Cher. Honey remarks that Cher is like honey in French. And then the credits roll, and that's the fucking movie. If that sounded disconnected to you, maybe you're right. Or maybe that's the point, but that's the crime that was committed on cinema screens. So, like any good crime, we need a background. We need to understand how this happened, where it came from. And our background today is lesbian Pulp Fiction. Honey Don't is marketed as a lesbian B-movie, and B-movie means campy, over-the-top drama, ridiculous aesthetic choices, and a hell of a lot of raunch. However, I would say that yes, Honey Don't is taking a lot of reference from those B-movies, but it is also an homage, or at least referencing the tropes and aesthetics of lesbian pulp fiction, specifically the lesbian pulp fiction of the 1950s and 60s, when there was a huge boom in that subgenre of pulp fiction. I mean, literally look at the covers. Look at the covers. Look at Honey Don't. Do you see what I mean? Yes, it is a B movie, but it also is this. Honey Don't is drenched in the past. The 70s 60s aesthetic is worn out intentionally so. Things are broken, old, brown, faded, stuck. The setting and the characters cling to the past, they cling to aesthetics, even though there are new technologies and new crimes. It's here in this decaying, dying, clinging to the past setting that lesbian pulps and lesbian pulp characters, which are outdated, still exist in earnest. They're a thing of the past, yes, but they're clung onto in this movie and brought to light. So here I figured I would explain how and why the conventions of lesbian pulp really fit Honey Don't"'s aesthetic, and give you some context for why Honey Don't" is sort of the way that it is. The golden age of lesbian pulp fiction was between 1950 and 1965, and the genre exploded in popularity after Tariska Torres' Woman's Barracks, which was a semi-autobiographical novel that described lesbian activity that she, a straight woman, witnessed during her time as a nurse in World War II. Pulps were popular because they were cheap fiction printed on paperbacks without first having a hardback released, and they would tell formulaic genre stories. You knew the arc of the story you would get by the genre: action, mystery, suspense, romance. Lesbian pulps were part of the men's adventure fiction category. Not the woman's adventure fiction category. I don't know if that was a thing. Men's. They were filled with action, sex, drugs, drinking, and depravity. They were violent, dramatic page-turners with salacious smut. However, lesbian pulps had an unintended consequence. Lesbian pulps could be bought at drugstores and on magazine racks, meaning they were able to reach lesbians who didn't even have the language to identify themselves as lesbians. These pulps told them that others had the feelings they did. Unfortunately, the pulps were usually homophobic because they were written for men. They were catered to men's interests, and a lesbian happy ending didn't really matter to men. I mean, maybe there were some fierce, what are those men, the Labubu men called? Maybe there are some fierce Labubu men allies out there, in the 50s. Maybe they are there. I don't know. These weren't for them. Keep reading Bell Hooks King. She wasn't there. Read... Okay, anyways, moving on. So, the pulps didn't care that lesbians were happy. It cared more about male satisfaction. Essentially, the idea was if a woman is with a woman, then the man doesn't matter. So the happy ending is not going to happen often for women, although they're going to get a different kind of happy ending. There were also, to add proof to this idea, there was some male gooner sitting in the back of our theater who clearly came in to watch Margaret Qualley and Aubrey Plaza get it on and get his rocks off. And I am not happy about that, okay? I had to live with that in my movie-going theater experience that I expected to be way better than it did. But that, hey, the men are still out there trying to watch lesbians get it on. Anyways, not all of the lesbian pulps were like that. Because lesbian pulps were so popular, there was space for some women, and some lesbians were able to write and publish lesbian pulps that were as pro-lesbian as they could be for the time. Pro-lesbian fiction often was less violent. It often had a female protagonist and a woman-on-woman conflict, and the relationship was important. Also, it usually ended with like a happy lesbian alone, but okay with her sexuality and not, rejecting her lesbianism. Or very rarely it did end up with two lesbians having a happy ending together in more ways than one. And this time, yay. These pulps were incredibly popular and they sold in the millions. Good lesbian pulps were eventually reprinted by gay presses and absorbed into lesbian print culture. You can buy all sorts of merchandise with lesbian pulp covers on it, and they became loved and enjoyed from an ironic distance for how silly they are and for their presence as an artifact, a part of queer history that can be enjoyed by real queer women who did exist and buy these books in the 50s. And that's just what's so amazing, is like there's this artifact from this time where people were like, there weren't a lot of gay people back then. It's like, no, they had these books and they could define themselves through this fiction. Even though it wasn't good, it was there. In other words, these pulps are a part of lesbian artistic culture. And when you look at the images of these pulps, it's hard not to see similarities between some of the campy, over-the-top sex appeal in them and Honey Don't. What's more important about these pulps, at least for our purposes today, is that they are melodramatic. And I mean that in two ways. One, action, drama, violence, sex! Maybe violent sex, which is not good but happened often. Anything that can happen is gonna happen. The twists and turns are so extreme, they are ridiculous. It's melodramatic because there is so much gasp drama. The second way comes from theory on melodrama, which I'm going to be talking about so much on this channel. You guys have no idea. So go read Linda Williams' article Playing the Race Card and or The Melodramatic Imagination by Peter Brooks. Melodrama enacts a social problem and reassures the readers that all will be morally right at the end of the day. The melodrama is the battle for good and evil that plays out in the story through the characters. Lesbian pulp fiction has a very specific melodrama. Either it asserts that lesbianism is evil and women who are lesbians will either repent or face punishment, thus all is right in the world, or the small pro-lesbian publications may make the ending switch, so the outrageous is hard to believe, the violence / betrayal / insanity that happens to the lesbian character in the end is so absurd that it doesn't make any sense. And thus, even though the melodrama concludes, the ending feels uncharacteristic and silly. Or the lesbian character may end up happy and alone at the end, or happy and partnered, thus affirming that this identity is right with the world. And Honey Don't literally ends like this. Lesbian A, Honey, ends up happy and alone, and lesbian B, MG, his violence is so over the top and dramatic that not even the fantastic actress that Aubrey Plaza is can make the script seem believable or good because it happens so quickly. So it does affirm that lesbianism is good. Since Honey Don't fits into the action, the intrigue, the drama, the sex of lesbian pulp fiction, and its ending is reminiscent of lesbian pulp fiction, it stands to reason that Honey Don't is also melodramatic. And if it is, what is the melodramatic tension? Is lesbianism good? Also, many movies have melodrama even if it's not intentional. A lot of movies are about something else than what the story actually is. Anyway, this is where the video is going to transform into why Night at the Museum 2 is an anti-capitalist masterpiece. I'm kidding. We know I'm kidding. It's time to find Honey Don't's central melodrama. Bring on the suspects! Suspect 1, religion / conservatism. Is religion the bad guy of Honey Don't? Death and religion are tied together in the opening shots of the film. We see Cher walk down to the crashed car and mess with Mia's body. She slides the cult signet ring off of Mia's finger before we know how she is killed or even anything about her. We associate her death with the church. The cult is sort of Christianity, but Devlin is a vessel for God, I think. The imagery, the advertising, and the language they use is all really pseudo-Christian. Like, there's a level of like, no, this is just like a 70s like Manson-esque cult, but then it's really dressed up Christian style. Reverend Devlin is a charismatic and self-obsessed preacher, which not all preachers, but this one. And people congregate at a church that kind of looks like a new-ish Christian church. Also, need to point out, Reverend Devlin, literally devil in disguise. The tenets of his church revolve around submission, submitting to him, to God, like literally there, and then it's like there's power in submission, but it's this strange BDSM message. And the idea of submission and there's power in submission is sort of connected to Christianity and religion in general. And the idea is you must submit yourself to the Lord, you must put faith in God's plan. You must live in service of the Lord. Devlin's rhetoric can be comforting. If you give up control, the horrible things that happen in your life are not yours to decide. It's easier to listen, to be led, to know there is someone, some divine force guiding you to the right place. However, the film does not judge those who submit. When Honey finds MG in her house, we find a different interpretation of God and submission. Submission is weakness, action is strength. You cannot give in to the forces around you. Those who submit bring pain onto themselves. That's literally MG's speech. It is an equal opposite of the Reverends, an extreme version that rejects the status quo but blames women rather than their abusers. MG kills women who submit. It's implied she sees them as herself before she killed her dad, accepting abuse and inviting it. This twist happens really quickly. We understand MG is evil the second a yearbook quote of hers mentions God. So God is tied to evil, because then the music cues get really specific after that. However, that doesn't mean the people at the church, the people who submit, are evil. Instead, they are people who are taken advantage of by religion, and we don't blame them as MG does. We feel sympathy for them, or we're led to feel sympathy for them. Those who are religious in this movie die. Literally. Mia's death sets off a domino effect of religious character after religious character dying. The church is death sold as salvation. If this is the central melodrama, it's not satisfying. In melodrama, the protagonist and antagonist butt heads more. It feels like the antagonist has taken over the protagonist's life and the people around them. If that's the church, it really doesn't affect Honey's life that much, except for in a montage, which we'll talk about later. If it's MG, they don't have a really close relationship. They just have sex, and MG ends up kidnapping her niece. There's not much of a struggle, and MG doesn't have a lot of time to be the villain. And this is a trope in melodrama. The antagonist often comes to the hero in the guise of a friend, and MG comes to the guise of a lover. But usually, oh, she's evil. There's signs, and you get to see little bits and pieces of her villainy, and it just doesn't, I don't know, it doesn't come together as well as it should. And then when it's finally revealed she is the villain, there's not there's kind of a struggle, but MG dies in the same scene where it's revealed. So it doesn't, payoff's not good. It's too quick, it's not good. It doesn't feel like a good melodrama. And if we're talking about the church and with Devlin, Honey interacts with Devlin in one scene and is like, yeah, this is not for me. And I would be more inclined to say that religion was the melodramatic tension if there was more of a conclusion or more development with Honey and the church. Or maybe even Corinne should have gone to the church. She didn't. I think she was just straight up kidnapped by MG. The most interesting critique of the church and Christianity, and the part that actually held weight and substance and made for just something interesting, was when Honey drives around Bakersfield and looks at bus stops for her missing niece. Along the way, she sees symbols of the church, advertisements on buses. When you have no one to turn to, nowhere to go, in a strange or messed up situation, the church promises community and salvation. They promise to help you if you submit to their belief system. Good Christians, in fact, I'll even say most Christians, help people regardless of their religion, but some don't, and some believe that true help is leading you to God, to their beliefs. So it becomes this complicated thing where the way you might be able to get help and support also comes with subscribing to a belief system and to joining something when you really just need the help and the support. This is substantial, I think, because it shows the pull of this thing and the hold it has over a community, Honey's community. And Honey stares at the advertisement, and we do wonder if Corinne went there, and if Corinne thought that was the answer, and then it really would impact Honey's life more. But we don't know if Corinne ever considered going there. We know that she was just kidnapped by MG and was going to be killed. So really the church thing doesn't pan out and doesn't seem to have the influence over the film, because MG isn't involved in the church, even though she is sort of religious. And that's the whole weird thing on its own. So religion could still be the central melodrama. It leads to death. Those who are religious extremists who murder and terrorize the weak in the name of God will not triumph in the end. The religious extremists that plague our world will go away. And that could be what this film is saying. And it just doesn't intersect with Honey's life enough for me to warrant calling it a melodramatic tension. Yes, Honey is meant to resist the church, and she does so easily. And sometimes the protagonist of a melodrama can do so easily. She just can keep resisting. But if that's melodrama, it's not good. And maybe it's not trying to challenge our beliefs in religion as much. Maybe the religion stuff is just in the background. It's just part of the setting. It's just something that needs to work itself out. Maybe this is just a pro-lesbian pulp story. Suspect 2! Maybe Honey Don't's central theme is just that lesbianism and liberalism is good, even in this old-fashioned world where people cling to the past. Yvonne Keller argues that there are 5 kinds of pulps. Lesbian pulps, pro-lesbian pulps, virile adventures, revamped pulps, pseudoscientific pulps, and journalistic pulps. Honey Don't is not a reprint of an older pulp, nor is it presenting itself as a scientific theory or sociological study, meaning it is either pro-lesbian or a virile adventure. Virile adventure stories feature a lot of sex, a male protagonist, and the lesbian might end up in a heterosexual marriage. Women are heavily objectified, and violence is very common. Pro-lesbian stories are women-centered and less violent. They have a woman's POV. They have more developed characters and are written by women. They also usually focus more on a love story. By this definition, Honey Don't is a pro-lesbian story, but Christine V. Wood identifies the basic plot structure of a homocentric story, a pro-lesbian story, as she calls them, and it doesn't fit Honey Don't that much. The heroine is on the brink of a major life change, and then a friend introduces her to a new social scene. There, she encounters a woman she finds captivating. As she becomes more involved with her new life, she begins to recognize this desire for this woman, and she is enticed into romantic intimacy, or she responds to a mutual attraction with this woman. Then a third person or outside party interrupts their love affair, and though she finds a way to preoccupy herself, the heroine is wistful and sad about her failed relationship and wishes she could somehow win her lover back. In the end, she finds peace in solitude, or the heroine is reunited with a female lover. This plot is not Honey Don't. Honey is established in her community and knows herself. It's not bad that her story doesn't fit one-to-one onto this formula. I mean, I would never ask a story to fit onto a theorist formula. I say trying to fit the story into a melodramatic framework, but it has some of the steps, but you gotta stretch it. Honey's new situation could be a new case, and then the woman she meets, MG, is who she meets working on the case because she's involved with the cops. And yes, does she know some of the cops? Yeah, but MG is sort of new to her, and they do begin a relationship and have a mutual sexual desire, and their romance, if you can call it that, is the reason the plot happens. MG meets Corinne through Honey. MG decides to kill Corinne because she comes over to Honey's house after her boyfriend horrifically beats her, and MG decides to kill Corinne because of that. And Corinne is only saved because Honey kills MG. So the relationship does have that beginning, middle, and end. Also, MG does go, like, missing, and Honey has to chase her down, which is kind of like a third party gets involved, and the third party is, like, the niece that I think MG kidnapped. You could kind of map the parts on, but you can't do it well enough. However, the ending does fit that traditional lesbian pulp narrative. Honey is happy on her own, is fine. The day has been saved. She's good as a lesbian. This one, MG, was just crazy. And so Honey Don't has the bones of pro-lesbian stories. It has, like, all the little characteristics, even if it doesn't have the typical structure, or very loosely follows that structure, if I'm being generous. Throughout the movie, Honey fights injustice and bad men, and men who are not trying to convince her not to be a lesbian, but are like, you should be with me. And Honey resists all of that, which is melodramatic, resisting this sort of submitting to men when the other women around her are submitting to men, but then it feels like maybe it's a judgment on those women, even though those women are victims. It's like, it gets bad, okay? But we see Honey resist and be comfortable in her lesbian identity. The twist at the end of the film is also very pulpy because MG out of nowhere has this crazy over-exaggerated dialogue, and it's revealed that she is the villain and the murderer in this film. And it seems so outrageous and impossible and ridiculous that it's so pulpy because the lesbian has to be alone in the end in a lot of these old stories. And Honey does end up alone, but she doesn't change. She's still confident in her lesbian identity just because this one lesbian goes crazy. Honey is good with herself. Detective Charlie Day, whose name is Marty, I think, keeps flirting with her throughout the movie, and even in the end, he asks her on a date, and she goes, "No, I like girls," and she reaffirms that that's her sexuality. And yeah, the film is modern, and does it really need to say lesbian good actually? No, but it references that pulpy time, and so maybe that's the point, even though we don't really have censors who are saying one lesbian needs to go crazy. This could work, except the themes of homophobia aren't really strong. It's just Honey is hot, so men flirt with her, and then she says, "I'm a lesbian," and then they don't really care. And that's just like sort of how men work sometimes. Not all men, but some. Also, the earlier part of the film doesn't really play into any sort of homophobic themes or tackle queerness that much, so it all feels a little disjointed. Like, we do learn that Honey and MG were both abused by their fathers, and that might tie into the them being homophobic towards them, but I don't really know. Whatever. The religion plot feels way more consistent than any stance on homophobia that this is trying to make. I think the reason there's a pulp ending on this story is because MG is stuck in her trauma, and her feelings and the way she is stuck are expressed in a melodramatic form of the past. Suspect 3. Honey's fantasy world. Honey doesn't live in the real world. She's a private detective, an old Hollywood profession. She uses a Rolodex instead of a database. I literally had to look up the word Rolodex, and it took me a while to figure out that that's the word I needed. Also, she doesn't really solve a single case. She stumbles into answers. She's hired to find out who Billy Eichner's boyfriend is cheating on him with. And the boyfriend dies, and so she finds that out. She is called by Mia before she dies, and Honey ends up sleeping with Mia's murderer. Her niece is going to be MG's next victim, but Honey goes to MG's house, not because she suspects MG, but because she needs MG's help. Also, MG's house is old. Everything looks exactly as it did when her parents were still alive. So again, stuck in the past. Honey only finds out when she's in the ambulance or the hospital that Corinne was at the house too, I think. Honey doesn't really do her job, but she doesn't need to because the world takes care of it. Honey's world resembles a lesbian pulp fiction piece. She shirks off conflict with humor. She doesn't uncover the reality of the cold at all. She doesn't seem to have any trauma from being stabbed by her lover. She survived. She goes back to live the same day again. And that's the thing. The end is just like the beginning. She and Detective Charlie Day have the same conversation they have at the beginning of the movie. And you get the sense that they'll have it again. Honey can drive action, and she does care about things. She clearly loves her sister and her nieces and nephews. She's determined to help the people in her life, and she will fight for them. I mean, she beats the shit out of Corinne's boyfriend, and that's actually a pretty good scene, all things considered. She can drive action, but she doesn't change. Honey is a static character, a character who may have been changed by this experience, shaped by it, as her abusive past has clearly shaped her into a hardened person who has issues forming deep attachments or displaying emotion. She tells MG she doesn't really have more than a few dates with one partner. She can't have a real relationship because she doesn't have a real life. She's a pulpy job and gets involved with other people's lives and problems. She doesn't face her own demons. The events of Honey Don't are only connected to Honey because she happens to be there. She is not important to the church plot at all, and it's by happenstance that she ends up in the bed of a murderer. MG's issues aren't really with Honey. Honey is just there, helping people who MG doesn't believe deserve help. The world around Honey is also stuck in the past. The opening credits are a drive through Bakersfield. All the names of the cast and the creators are on faded signs from bygone eras, worn down houses and buildings. There's old cars and nostalgic type setting. Honey's aesthetic, her outfits, her office, her home, make it look like she was plucked out of the 60s and 70s and forced to live in the modern world. She wears bright red lipstick and long dresses. She has an old AC unit and refuses to use a computer. The police office is an old building. The houses we see are mostly old homes that are very run down because the tenants are too poor to revitalize them. The film does have some weird ideas about class. It doesn't feel good because it's associating poor people with conservatism, with being stupid and lazy. I think if you're going to talk about like poverty and conservatism and how those mix, there needs to be a level of nuance there that this film does not have the time for, because it's so short and it is about other things. So it's a little odd. Anyways, Honey is surrounded by people who are stuck in the past. Her assistant is dressed in the same aesthetic as her. The detective, Charlie Day, can't acknowledge that Honey is a lesbian. MG lives in the shadow of her father in the old house. Billy Eichner has a bit about needing to wipe down a chair because COVID hasn't gone away. And it hasn't gone away, but I think the point is to be like, we don't need to be doing that anymore, Billy. Mia's parents refuse to use buses even when their car breaks down. A woman at the bar thinks quitting drinking, changing, is bad for you. Everything is stuck in an endless cycle. And yes, things change, technology changes, people change, people die, people grow older, but everyone clings to something old that's faded away. The church also feels stuck in the past. It feels like Manson era light, I guess, but it's more important to understand that the church preys on people who are stuck, and literally everyone in this film is stuck in the past. And through the actions of the church, they end up even more stuck, and they end up stuck in a cycle of violence, because literally everyone in the church dies. There can't be a conclusion, because even after Honey is hospitalized and her sister is put in grave danger, she just carries on. She is not jostled or changed. She is stuck in this same cycle. If the melodrama is a critique of how people are stuck in the past, it actually has legs. Honey, in her 60s, 70s aesthetic, is progressive. She challenges people who think past ideology is good, and she questions power, the church. By the end of the film, Honey has resisted, with ease, the forces that draw her into a past ideology, and stays true to her progressive beliefs, but keeps her aesthetic. Honey doesn't have to change because she is always right, and the world will always right itself. The people who are bad will die. The people who are stuck in the past in the wrong way will always get their comeuppance. She fights conservatives, she fights people who are stuck in the religious past, and she always wins, and she fights them while herself being stuck in the past, and everything will always be good. And melodrama does reinforce that the world will always return to a perfect state. But it feels bad. A lot of melodramatic movies don't feel as bad. Honey is still stuck. She doesn't deal with any of her issues. Her life turns out fine, and you know that the same thing is just gonna happen again, and you're always going to be stuck in this melodramatic loop where the world gets thrown off its axes, but by the end it returns to normal. And that's just how it's going to be, and maybe that's the point, that we're just doomed to repeat this cycle forever and ever. And that's the interesting thing about melodrama, is because it does not uproot systems to have a good ending. An evil person or persons is defeated, not often an institution. And yes, that's because melodrama does have to play out at the level of character. And so when the evil is killed, the evil in the world is killed. And it's a metaphor for that. But it doesn't mean that anything will change. So Honey lives this life that is mostly inconsequential. She fights the cult bad guy. She is stuck in the past, is stuck living the same day over and over again, knowing that yes, things will resolve and be good in the end, but people are gonna die and violence is gonna happen along the way, and that's just how it is. And that's so depressing and unsatisfying, and also like true to reality. And melodrama usually hides the fact that this problem will return. When conflict is resolved on the level of character and the evil is defeated, the evil character is defeated, it means the evil in the world has been defeated. And That doesn't feel like the case. It feels like the same thing is gonna keep happening to Honey again and again and again. And she's not gonna move on or change because she doesn't deal with anything in her past living this life. She doesn't have past values, but she is stuck in the past. And it's really unsatisfying to just think, yeah, okay, all of this is gonna happen again, and this meant nothing. This whole hour and 29 minutes meant nothing. And it wasn't even a good story. And maybe that's life. So who done it? What's the melodrama? Who did it? Who's the culprit? I don't know. And maybe that's the point. That there is no answer. That I can't throw melodrama and lesbian pulp fiction of old onto this story. Maybe it's postmodern. The point is that nothing matters. Nothing happens and nothing matters. Now, listen, I have opinions about Quentin Tarantino's Pulp Fiction. I don't want to put them out on the internet at this time because I love myself. That's a lie. Because I value my peace. But what it does is it makes a satisfying conclusion out of a story that is postmodern, that doesn't really mean anything. It has themes that don't matter as much as the excitement and style of the story. It comes together to be an over-the-top, pulpy adventure. It takes the pulp's pure entertainment and makes pure entertainment. It's wildly considered a film about nothing, postmodern, nihilistic, and yet, aside from a few scenes that I won't talk about here, it's a fun, action-packed time. The movie cares about narrative throughline and tension. That's why it's all mixed up. You see all the parts together as a whole puzzle piece. And maybe that whole doesn't mean a lot. It's a fun way to have the story resolve, and it's a fun way to feel the tension. It works. And Honey Don't doesn't work. Also, one reason I'll defend Drive Away Dolls is while it is pulpy and campy and stupid, it has a plot and engages with sexuality and love as its central melodrama, like, pretty heavily, and really does care about the lives and the growth of its characters. I don't know if it's worth the conclusion I've come to, that it is this nihilistic piece of cinema that says we're all stuck in the past, doomed to live the same day over and over again while violence happens in the background because we can't do something or deal with ourselves and actually make affecting change happen if we're just focused on people at an individual level. I don't think the film is trying to say that. I think I'm insane. Honey Don't, to me, is about the inability to escape the past. And that can make the film good, in some ways, but I fear that the film that I have just talked to you about only exists in my head. I'm not sure if it's the one I watched, because I didn't enjoy the one I watched. But that concept about the movie in your head is a video for a different time. Until then, the mystery of the central melodrama, the story Honey Don't is trying to tell, will remain unsolved. Anyways, thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed that video. I hope it cuts together well, because I stumbled over everything I was saying. Feel free to check out Honey Don't for yourself, or Honey, don't do that. I didn't have a good time, but did I write 8 pages of content for this? Yes, I did. Make sure you subscribe or unsubscribe, unsub, suspect. That's a Criminal Minds reference. Okay, bye!